Yeah, the book of Ecclesiastes has 4 endings, in case you had not noticed. The original ending is in chapter 12, verse 8, and then there are 3 additional appended endings that have been successively edited onto the original ending by later generations of readers and editors, each with a very different perspective on the text that came before. The first of these is in verse 9 and 10, the second of these in verse 11 and 12, and the last of these in verse 13 and 14. And not only in some ways do they disagree with the immediately preceding text, but they also disagree amongst each other, attesting to the fact that the book of Ecclesiastes has had a rough reception history. It's been controversial ever since the ancient world when it first debuted. The original ending can be found in verse 8, vanity, vanity, everything is vanity. It's cast in the same voice that Kohelet has been using consistently throughout the text in first person and then directly addressing the audience in second person. This is a callback to the very first verses of the text where you see the refrain from the first time, and then it's used periodically throughout the book. That's a very natural place to end the text, with this sort of inclusio that sort of lets you know that this is everything that the author has to say. The second ending, verse 9 and 10, shifts voices. We were speaking about Kohelet in the first person before, now we're speaking about Kohelet in the third person. And this ending sort of has an apologetic function. It's sort of vouching for the author and for the immediately preceding text, attesting to the text and the author's value. They've contributed to the community. They've been a lot of help. We've reflected on these words. They spent a lot of time putting this text together. We've found a lot of value in it. And you would only get that kind of editorial addition to a text if the value of the text had been called into question by other readers down through the years. The third ending is then in verses 11 and 12. There's another shift in voice. We're no longer talking about Kohelet as a character either in first person or third person. And this third ending is much more skeptical. It calls into question not only the entire wisdom tradition and sort of everybody who contributes to it, but also like all books and all reading and all study, and tries to paint all of this as sort of a useless exercise. Then the fourth and final ending can be found in verses 13 and 14, and this is the pietistic ending that in many ways tries to erase almost everything that came before. This ending says, at the end of the day, all you really need to do is obey God, which is exactly the opposite of the mood and sentiment and specific ideas that have been expressed for the preceding 12 chapters. Ecclesiastes is in many ways almost an anti-theological text, questioning the meaning of life in a world where God exists. And just to throw out all this poignancy and nuance and complexity and some rather incisive criticisms of the meaningfulness of life in light of God's existence in favor of this just obey God message really does a lot of violence to the text that came before. So yes, Ecclesiastes is a provocative text. It is today. It was in the ancient world, and we know that because it has these 4 different endings with all these different people with very different attitudes trying to get in a final say about what the text means.